The Amazing Digital Circus has quickly become one of my favorite animated shows, and really shows in general, of all time. And I want to talk about how momentous of an occasion it is that it got a cinematic release. Most of the time, it's difficult for an animated feature to get a cinematic release at all, since most people view them as children's movies. Outside of Disney and DreamWorks, it's difficult for studios to be taken seriously in regard to those productions. And while indie animation has been around for a very long time at this point, especially on YouTube, nothing like this has ever happened before. This is an accomplishment that no other indie animation studio, production, individual can claim to have achieved before. I mean, I grew up going to the movie theaters, going to the physical movie theaters, no such thing as streaming services back then. I remember going and knowing that those places were for Disney movies, DreamWorks movies. I saw the first Shrek, and every Shrek after that. I watched all 8 Harry Potter movies in the theaters, before J.K. Rowling proved out to be a TERF and a nightmare. Movie theaters were for big budget things. They were for the familiar brands and nothing else. Disney, DreamWorks, Sony, Illuminations, and a bunch of, here and there smaller companies that didn't stick around for long or maybe moved on to other stuff. That's who you could find at the movie theater. Nothing else. Certainly not an episodic cartoon. The fact that Glitch and Gooseworks have managed to achieve this, having their last episode, not movie, not cinematic masterpiece, the last episode of their YouTube series in theaters, it is massive. I don't think people really understand how incredible this is. And it isn't just any sort of show that has achieved this. It's not just any animated feature, it's not just any story, it's a story that I consider to be one of the best pieces of modern animation to ever come of the genre. And it was from an independent creator for free on YouTube. It's an incredible story that matches the incredible degree of this accomplishment. And while it is a retelling of an older short story, it still manages to stand apart as its own unique thing. Mark my words, The Amazing Digital Circus will go down with Into the Spider-Verse and other modern animations that revolutionized the genre and showed what it was capable of. And when you look at a lot of the big budget companies like Disney and DreamWorks, I would argue that it's even managed to surpass a lot of their more recent ambitions. What with The Amazing Digital Circus's success taking place not long after the critical failure that was Wish and others of Disney's recent catalog. But I think it's done it in such a way and at such a time that Disney and DreamWorks and the other big ticket items are going to be forced to pay attention and turn a more cautious eye their way. Happy days, my name is Daisy Mays, and welcome back to Daisy Chains, the series where I give you a little bit of a video essay on something that's been on my mind while I get into makeup for a show or filming or whatever I happen to be getting into makeup for. In the first episode of this series, we talked about how I believe that rage bait is destroying the digital world, and now I want to talk about a very different digital world. And it's one that you might not be expecting to sound so negative, but here we go. The Amazing Digital Circus's fandom has become a huge problem. By now, you've probably heard of the Amazing Digital Circus, even if you don't necessarily know what it is, so allow me to illuminate you a bit. A crash course, if you will. Or if you won't, I'm still gonna say it. The Amazing Digital Circus is an animated web series created by Gooseworks through the company Glitch. Now, Glitch is an independent animation company that has been known for a few other successful projects, as well as some more recent ones, such as the premiere of The Knights of Guinevere, as well as their recent announcement that they are currently working on an adaptation of the webcomic Luck-a-Daisy to be another web series. But without any doubt, their most successful endeavor to date is The Amazing Digital Circus. Its success has, as of yet, been completely unsurpassed. The Amazing Digital Circus follows a cast of 6 humans. Their names are Pomni, Kinger, Ragatha, Jax, Gangle, and Zubul. And it follows their day-to-day as they navigate being trapped in the Amazing Digital Circus, a sort of computer game that they find themselves in, from which there seems to be no escape. The show follows an episodic format where we get to know the characters and learn more about how they entered the circus in the first place and what their lives were like back before they entered it all. And as they spend their day-to-day going on adventures, they are guided by the incredible host of the Amazing Digital Circus, the AI known as Kane, as well as his bubble assistant. Now, they're going on these adventures at all in order to prevent their minds from atrophying and deteriorating and making them crazy. at which point they turn into abstractions, sort of terrifying monsters that only run on instinct, maybe, destroying everything in sight. As they go on more and more adventures, they get to know one another and more about the circus, as well as the mysterious C&A. They eventually unlock clues as to why they're there and how they get out. I'm not really doing it justice the way I'm describing it. What you really need to know is that it's incredibly invented, beautifully animated and voice acted, and it's even based on the classic sci-fi horror short story I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. Honestly, anything that gets the kids reading at all nowadays is a win in my book. And it has gotten kids reading the story, it's crazy. Mind you, I've never read this story, but it's on my list. Now, the series consists of 9 episodes, with the final one airing at present, as of recording this video, in theaters, which, as I've mentioned before, is a huge deal. But the previous 8 episodes are free to watch on YouTube, and the 9th one will be as well on June 19th, 2026. Despite how short the series is, they've only released a single episode every 2 or 3 months, so it's been a bit of a slow burn. And honestly, it has proven very effective, giving the animators time to make everything perfect and giving the fandom time to grow and develop. But as we mentioned before, the fandom is the main subject of this video. But first, for those of you unaware, let me give you a little bit of a background on fandom culture in general. This might be the first time you're hearing that word. So, fandoms, that's a really loaded fucking topic, to say the least. I just cannot talk about it in detail or I will genuinely explode. The basics are as follows. A fandom is basically a subculture that develops around a shared interest, which technically can be any sort of activity. Most commonly, though, it is used, especially in the online sphere, to describe fan cultures around certain properties, specifically franchises, celebrities, books, video games, that kind of stuff. Nerd shit, baby! Real good nerd shit. While anything can technically be the subject of a fandom, if you ask somebody what their fandom is like surrounding their specific interests, you'll probably be able to tell whether or not it's really a fandom based on their response. For example, if you ask somebody who loves golf what their fandom is like, they're probably not going to know what you're fucking talking about. But if you ask a fan of The Lord of the Rings, of World of Warcraft, of The Amazing Digital Circus, then they will probably be able to tell you more. See, fandoms typically refer to and consist of not just fans of a property, but super fans, ones that can tell you everything about it. Harry Potter, unfortunately, but since I mentioned it, is a perfect example, seeing as how it was one of the first examples of a fandom bleeding into mainstream popular culture. J.K. Rowling may be a transphobic asshole, but it cannot be understated what her flagship property actually did for fandoms in general. See, fandom was never really a term that mainstream audiences were familiar with, like at all, even though they go back pretty far. One of the earliest ones I know about is Star Trek, and the whole Mary Sue debacle with some of the first fanfiction. In fact, I think that one was the first fanfiction. But with the rising popularity of anime and manga and video games, and the more readily available and accessible forms of those media that have been seeping into the mainstream over the last couple decades or so, it was really only a matter of time. When Harry Potter reached its peak in popularity and propelled all of its stars directly into the limelight in a way like no celebrities had really been in before, the dam keeping fandom culture out of mainstream pop culture officially broke. Irrevocably, from what I can tell. Suddenly, countless throngs of the unwashed masses were attending midnight premieres and Comic-Con and other conventions, visiting online forums and engaging with their favorite properties in a way like they never had or even considered ever before. I mean, it was old news for those of us OGs in the game, but for the newly genied street rats, it was a whole new world. Potter Fever's collision with pop culture fundamentally shook the foundations of what fandoms could really be. And basically nothing has really come close since to matching it. Well, Game of Thrones got pretty close, but they failed to stick the landing at the end. Even the subject of today's video has the potential to get close, if it weren't for the problem at hand and the elephant in the room. Throughout the history of modern fandoms, there have been significant growing pains. Homestuck is legendary within the familiar circles in this regard, because of its proclivity for leaving hotel bathrooms covered in gray paint, and generally confusing all interested parties with their attempts to explain the actual plot of their web series? video game, I still don't really know what Homestuck is, to be quite honest with you. The series Supernatural is another example of a series that had to deal with their fandom's inevitable rage after they took Bury Your Gaze to a whole new supernatural level. A new dimension, really. Literally. If you know, you know. And later on, Rick and Morty would make headlines as their followers went and absolutely terrorized every McDonald's within a national radius. Fucking Szechuan sauce. I still can't look at pickles the same way. On paper, the Amazing Digital Circus's fandom's offenses doesn't come close to the offenses of the past, but they do find themselves in a unique situation. Homestucks, for example, mostly had their infamous reputations relegated to conventions and online spaces, while the fury and rage surrounding Supernatural's poor decision-making skills were even more specifically relegated to sites like Tumblr. Rick and Morty's Szechuan Sauce Showdown was really the only time in any of these examples that it became a problem for non-fans. But it was also in regard to an animated show that was targeted predominantly at adults. As a result, it was easy for the mainstream to sort of write that off as weird adults being weird in public. I'm always worried this is going to be a plumping lip liner anymore. And you may be thinking, hey, Daisy, you idiot. First of all, rude. Second of all, what are you talking about? The Amazing Digital Circus is also an animated show typically marketed towards adults. It should be in the same situation. You'd think that. And while you're basically right, there is a problem. When I personally went to go see The Amazing Digital Circus, the last act, at a matinee, 1 p.m. on a Thursday, one of the fun things you get to do as an adult, if you remember to take off work like I did, there were only about 7 or 8 other patrons in the theater with me, and almost half of them were children. This may seem shocking to you, but let's go over the facts. They were definitely not there by mistake. I know that for a fact because one of the children stood up during Who's Running the Show, the musical number in episode 8, and proceeded to not only sing the entire song word for word, but perfectly recreate the entire dance. I won't lie to you, I was very impressed. It was charming. He did a great job. I can't wait to see him in community theater Peter Pan or something. I don't know. Positive Shadowcast performance critiques aside, though, this discovery on my part prompted an unexpected development. The Amazing Digital Circus, accidentally, has a sizable under 18 minor child fanbase. And I'm not just talking about the teenagers in high school who like it, I'm talking about the children, middle school and below. I mean, they're all children, but you get the idea. Now, this is shocking, I know, but only if you squint. Let's look at the Amazing Digital Circus for what it is. It is a brightly colored, well-animated, cleverly written story with an in-universe reason to censor most of the explicit content and language, with a handful of Zooble-shaped exceptions, with a lot of genuinely good lessons, interesting characters and beautiful moments, and an engaging overall mystery. All of those things add up to be a story that kids can really get behind. Especially since kids are genuinely capable of and honestly very interested in exploring more complicated subject matter than we really give them credit for. That trend of what radicalized you, a lot of us have stories from our childhood to answer with, don't we? With the influx of children, whether intentional or accidental, it fundamentally changes the way fandom is built. I mean, after all, fandoms, by their nature, are predominantly an adult environment. Not exclusively, but certainly predominantly, and this becomes a huge problem when you look at the way that this fandom in particular carries itself. The Amazing Digital Circus's fandom has a reputation after a fairly short time of being in existence at all. They have attacked Glitch, they have attacked Gooseworks, the creator of the show, they have attacked one another, and they have demonstrated a sense of entitlement that has threatened the very foundation of this show. Two of the most recent examples that come to mind are them criticizing Gooseworks and Glitch for deciding to have a theatrical release first. Now, mind you, the finale of the show is going to be premiering on YouTube for free as usual on the 19th, while the theaters began showing it as early as the 4th. Obviously, there is the worry of spoilers, but frankly, that's more of an internal issue that the fandom itself should be taking precautions against and managing their expectations over. But they raised a huge stink over it, And that doesn't even begin to cover the most recent controversy where they accused Gooseworks, the creator of the Amazing Digital Circus, of racism. Now, the basis for this that they cited is baseless. I have seen the tweets that everybody is referring to. It implied that Gooseworks had a dark, edgy sense of humor around her friends, but it did not ever imply that she used slurs or held racist views when she was not in the limelight. Now, was it wise of Gooseworks to leave any room for doubt or speculation there? No, but like, what are you gonna do? She probably shouldn't have been interacting with her fandom to this degree anyway. But who could really blame her? It's fun to talk to people who are fans of your work, until it's not. So attacks on business models, attacks on personal character, and on top of all that, the finale itself was leaked, I believe, in Brazil not long ago. And in an effort to avoid any spoiling myself, let's just say that I am very unhappy with that leak. With all of these offenses in mind, it gives you an idea of how demented and entitled this fandom can be when it's not busy being wonderful and creative and engaging and interesting. Which it can be, believe it or not. I'm not painting a great picture of that, but that's not really the point of this video, so. Obviously, not everybody in the fandom sucks, but it's enough of a disproportionate amount that it affects the perception as a whole. And now that we know that there are lots of kids in the audience who may already or will eventually have access to the internet, it becomes a much bigger problem. Can't believe the drag queen is having to explain to you how fragile and sensitive children can be. And this is why I've done my best to keep this video as spoiler-free as I possibly can. It helps that I'm not actually making like a theory video or anything. Personally, I've always found those a little bit corny. I just don't think it's fair for rogue agents within the fandom to be exposing Gooseworks and Glitch's hard work to this kind of unfair scrutiny. It's fun to theorize to an extent, but the theory crafting done in this series has been kind of over the top and has barely left any surprises to be found out naturally. And I really think a large part of this fandom's bad behavior just comes from them getting their personal feelings hurt because they expected things to be done one way, and then when it wasn't done that way, they were livid. What I can tell you for sure without giving anything away is that I personally loved the ending. It made sense to me, I'm happy with it, and it's about what I expected from any ending. Some people are going to be devastated, some people are going to be delighted, and I'm sure we'll hear all about it because, as mentioned, this fandom has had some of the worst offenses in terms of theorizing and controversies and conspiracies than any other I have seen. And listen, I love analysis just as much as the next cross-dressing clown, but you gotta remember, there comes a time when enough is enough, and you should just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. The show that you did not write, and that you don't need to help somebody write. You're spoiling things not just for everybody else, but for yourself. Don't you want there to be mysteries and surprises in this world that you haven't personally solved yet? To keep you going? To keep you motivated? Remember, when a show has long breaks in between its episodes, it's not a personal dig at you, it's because you're supposed to have other things to occupy yourself in between those releases. Life is meant to be lived in every department, not just that one show you like. Now that the show is done, Gooseworks has expressed that she is going on a hiatus from creating things, and really, who could blame her? She's faced more backlash and opinions from this fandom of her flagship success story than most people will experience over the entirety of their careers. I'm sure I'm missing something because of my biases, but I do admit that. I am biased. Going forward, I hope not to see a repeat of this fiasco that has been every single controversy, every single explosive leak, and every single theoretical war that could be waged across the online sphere. But I know I will. It's the nature of fandoms. In fact, it's the nature of anything where people are passionate about something. It's why you see the same arguments made in drag. It's why you see the same arguments made in books and sports and celebrity stan culture. It's where we put the feelings that we have for our favorite shows and characters and worlds that are too big for us to explore all on our own. But I still feel that fundamentally fandom culture is good. The amount of art and writing that has come as a direct result of fandom culture is honestly astonishing. Hell, 50 Shades of Grey began its life as a Twilight fanfic, and Twilight was inspired by the band My Chemical Romance, and My Chemical Romance was formed as a result of Gerard Way experiencing 9/11. And by that many degrees of separation, 9/11 caused 50 Shades of Grey. Fandoms are wild. I am burdened with that knowledge, and now so are you. Good luck. Enjoy. Human experience is meant to be nuanced and complicated, but it's also important to remember that yours specifically is not so important that everybody needs to experience it with you. Loving something to the point of an obsession that prevents other people from being able to enjoy it fully? Where's the joy in that? And furthermore, what's the point? I don't have a clue. I just don't want to see any more assholes ruining my favorite shows. I can do that all on my own. And something else that I can do all on my own is remind you that my name is Daisy Mays, and I am wishing you all some very happy days.